Before Robert Pattinson, before Gary Oldman, and before even Bela Lugosi, there was Max Schreck and Nosferatu. But this now legendary movie wasn't always regarded as such, and its legacy is a lot muddier, or should I say bloodier, than you might think. Nosferatu is a 1922 vampire film directed by F.W. Murnau, starring Max Schreck as the titular character. Released by the short-lived Prana Films, Nosferatu was an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. In fact, it was so unauthorized that Stoker's heirs sued Enrico Dykman and Albin Grau, who founded Prana Films, which resulted in a court ordering all copies of Nosferatu destroyed and for Prana to pay out Stoker's wife a considerable sum of money. However, collecting that money would prove to be difficult, as Prana would declare bankruptcy in order to get out of, or at the very least, delay giving Stoker's wife the money. Jeez, talk about blood-sucking, am I right?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Nosferatu made certain changes, such as moving the story's setting from London to Germany, and renaming the characters Harker and Dracula to Hutter and Count Orlok. However, many plot details went unchanged. Hutter, like Harker, works in real estate, and the movie begins with him traveling to finalize a real estate deal with Orlok, similar to Harker's dealings with Dracula. Additionally, Dracula's iconic Demeter segment is basically ripped off exactly. Something original that the movie did come up with, though, is the idea of sunlight killing vampires. In Stoker's original novel, sunlight only weakens vampires, but it doesn't kill them outright. Murnau reportedly had a much more extensive slaying sequence planned out, but had to ditch it as costs of production were continuing to rise. The solution? Just have the sun take him out. Funny how something like a budget constraint has etched itself into the legacy of pretty much all vampire movies moving forward. Albin Grau, the film's producer, was an artist, architect, and known occultist. In fact, he was even part of Fraternitas Saturni, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, one of Germany's oldest and best-known magical orders. This background in the occult would serve as heavy inspiration for the look of Nosferatu, as Grau would use much of his occult knowledge to inspire the look of the film. Grau would claim that he got the inspiration from Nosferatu while serving in World War I. He claimed that he came across a Serbian farmer who told him that his father had become a vampire and that he had been forced to kill him. Like I mentioned before though, he likely just read a copy of Dracula and that farmer probably just murdered his dad. Production on Nosferatu was simultaneously scrappy but also expensive. For instance, cameraman Fritz Arno Wagner only had one camera to work with, which meant that there was only one negative. This meant that they needed to follow the script exactly, but this did not stop Murnau from rewriting 12 pages of the movie throughout its production. Murnau also insisted on filming a lot of the movie on location, which may sound normal, but was actually a very new practice for movies at the time. Advertising the movie was also a beast unto itself. Now, while I can't find exact numbers, it was reportedly even higher than the cost of the actual movie. This included a lavish masquerade premiere at the Berlin Zoological Garden, and also reportedly having Max Schreck do interviews in his Count Orlok makeup. Grau had huge aspirations for Prana. He wanted the studio to produce a number of other occult and horror films post-Nosferatu. In many ways, it sounds like it would have been the Blumhouse of its time. However, after the lawsuit and bankruptcy declaration, Nosferatu would end up being its only release. Florence Stoker also wanted to make sure that her husband's vampire was the only vampire, and if she couldn't bleed them for all they were worth, she could make sure that they were forgotten. Florence would sell the right to her husband's work to Universal, and in 1931, Bela Lugosi's version of the character would take the world by storm. He wasn't just scary, he was lavish, suave, and by a number of accounts a sex symbol of his time. Count Orlok and his gross rat face would fade into obscurity. Now, while Florence Stoker saw that most copies of Nosferatu were destroyed, a few obviously survived the judge's orders, but this would lead to the movie having an almost eerie and even cursed-like reputation, something that its titular star, Max Schreck, only helped enhance. For years, rumors would circulate about Schreck and who he was. People claimed that he wasn't the only person who played Count Orlok in the movie, or that he was in fact an actually far more famous actor under the makeup, but who didn't want to be associated with a horror movie, or the most outlandish, that he was an actual supernatural being. In a Variety Fair article by Anthony Bresnikan, the writer notes that Schreck's name might have been a big cause of this hubbub. It turns out that Schreck is a German word for fright. I mean, hey, Max Fear, Max Fright, Max Spooky Dookie. What else could this guy possibly be than someone in disguise, or, an actual monster that somehow got convinced to star in a movie? Over the years, other writers and film historians would only help further Schreck's mystique by misconstruing facts or by simply not having enough information and needing to fill in blanks. It didn't help that Schreck liked to keep it to himself and was known to wander off for hours at a time in his makeup. What was likely just time for him to cool off and collect his thoughts probably created an air of mystery to those around him. The real story, though, is considerably less eventful. It turns out that Max Schreck was simply someone that just didn't really aspire to fame. In fact, it's believed that what probably drew him to the role of Orlok was that he'd be under so much makeup that people probably wouldn't recognize him. He'd be able to star in the movie and then just go about his regular everyday life. There was no secret A-list actor, there was no creature of the night signed into servitude of an overly ambitious director. There was just a pretty simple guy who enjoyed hiking, theater, and maybe sleeping around on his wife, but I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum. They reportedly had an open marriage. That's for them to settle in the hereafter. This is funny to think about now because if I wanted to know who someone was in a movie, even if they were under a ton of makeup, I would simply just take out my phone and a few swipes later would probably know more about that person's life than even they did. But this was a time before computers, before smartphones, before even TV. And I have to imagine that it was a lot easier for an actor to fade into the background if they wanted to. Actually, if you want to watch a fun movie that plays with this concept, I highly recommend the 2000 movie Shadow of the Vampire, which is a fictional telling about the production of Nosferatu and plays with the idea that Murnau made a Faustian deal with a real vampire played by Willem Dafoe, which is extra funny because Dafoe is playing the Van Helsing type of character in Robert Eager's new Nosferatu movie. Nosferatu would receive a small bump in popularity when in 1979, Werner Herzog would release his adaptation of the movie. By this time, Florence Stoker had passed away and the copyright on Dracula was now fair game, so this movie serves as an almost blending of both Nosferatu and Dracula. For instance, the original names from Stoker's novel are used, but this movie keeps the German setting and of course draws from the original for its design of Nosferatu/Dracula. Nosferatu would make its way through the ages through bootlegs and late-night screenings, but Dracula and other vampires would take much of the accolades over the years. Re-releases would happen that had newly added scenes and in some cases new scores, and in fact, around Halloween you might be able to even find screenings where the score is played live. Like many people, my first exposure to Nosferatu came through the now legendary Nosferatu gag in SpongeBob.
Wait! If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights?
Nosferatu!
Which would then be my way of finding myself to the Universal Monsters, which would go on to become a lifelong special interest for me. Geez, however many decades later, I guess Florence Stoker got what she wanted, at least in my case, as Nosferatu really did just serve as a bridge for me to her husband's character and to the stable of other Universal monsters. It's been an uphill battle for the pointy-eared freak. Still, despite being shrouded in IP theft and production nightmares, Nosferatu ultimately does stand on its own. It's filled with striking imagery and amazing atmosphere that helps make it its own vampiric experience. And while not the first vampire story, it was the first vampire story put to film, which means every other vampire, yes, even Dracula, owes it a debt, like a sick satanic debt. And who knows, with the Robert Eggers movie on the horizon, maybe Count Orlok will finally get his day in the sun.